We're about ready to roll.
Okay, the reading from Emmett Fox for March the 2nd is called Confusion of Duties. It cannot be your duty to do anything that is beyond your reach or your strength at the moment. It cannot be your duty to do anything that sacrifices your own integrity or your own spiritual development. It cannot be right to be hurried or sad or discouraged or angry or resentful or antagonistic under any circumstances. If you have no time for prayer and meditation, you will have lots of time for sickness and trouble. And there's a short reading from Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verse 13, which is, "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man and woman." And I added the woman.
And the Lamsa translation is identical except for this is given by one master to every man and woman. Well, back in 2021, I did a couple of sessions where we looked at some of the entries in the Gospel of Thomas. And this week I felt led to perhaps do a few more. Background, I think it's 112 entries in the Gospel of Thomas. Now, it's generally accepted that this was not written by St. Thomas. They don't know who it was written by, but it appears to have been the first attempt to record or put on record the sayings attributed to the Christ. And some scholars believe that all the four who wrote the synoptic gospels, the one in the Christian Bible, the ones in the Christian Bible, use this as their original source, because theirs came even later after the death. They'd never even known the guy, shall we say. And they're what happens, it appears, is this was written among the Gnostics, those who believed in the power of knowledge. And when Athanasius and others who were in the Orthodox school decided that they were in control and they would identify what was real, this is one of the things that got knocked out and buried, as the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Judas were also. The translation starts out, "These are the hidden words that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote them down." It is alleged by some, and using this name as part of the reason, that Jesus had a twin brother. Didymus means twin. Who knows? Thomas also in Aramaic means twin. So twin. Didymus is Greek. Thomas is Aramaic. So at least the allegation is that there was more than one person associated with Christ's virgin birth. So in previous ones, and they are available on the internet in 2021, as I recall, I discussed the verses or the sayings through 9, along with what I could see as interpretation, my interpretation. Now, I want to be very clear, this is not authority speaking. I would read it and then I would sit on it and ask for insight. Now, it's entirely possible it's for me alone or I'm dead wrong. But that's up to you. But we may as well share and see where each of us is led. So the opening, let's see, where is the opening here? Just to start you out, and this was a translation by Stephen Patterson and James Robinson. It starts out, these are the hidden words that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote them down. And the first one is, and he said, whoever finds the meaning of these words will not taste death. And every one of these entries is Jesus says. In other words, there's no attempt to create any sort of narrative. This is just a scribe who wrote down, he said this, and then he said this, and then he said this. For, I think, as I recall, it's 122 times. So, verse 10, Jesus says, I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I am guarding it till it blazes. Well, metaphysically, fire is the divine spirit. The divine spirit that exists in each of us is each of us, if you will, since we're all God stuff. And from our knowledge, our thinking in terms of the Hawkins scale, the brighter the energy blazes, the higher the frequency on the Hawkins scale that we're living, that we're working on, and that we can share with those who are in this world and are farther down on the scale and are hurting and are needing to experience the power of divine love. Verse 11, Jesus says, the heaven will pass away, and the heaven above it will pass away, and the dead are not alive, and the living will not die. In the days when you consumed what was dead, you made it alive. When you are in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two. When you became two, when you become two, what will you do? So I think the gospel here, or the quote allegedly from Jesus, remember, we don't know where these came from. We simply know that about well over 50% of them appear in some form or other in the four gospels. So I think in this case, the Christ was referring to our many levels of existence, or if you will, the many planes we exist on. Think, for instance, of this earth-based existence versus what I think of as the shamanic side of life, the other side of life that most of us at best get a glimpse of. And in this verse, Jesus intersperses acknowledgement of these various levels of existence with the contrast of our own disconnectedness to the divine when we are too wrapped up in this flesh-based existence. Now, speaking of that reminds me of Sister Pepper when she talked about verses in Genesis, how when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the garden, they put on coats of skin. Coats of skin. And it was those coats of skin that cut them off from the joyous existence where there was no trouble, where life was easy, where the connection with the divine was constant. And it was our own lack of focus or our own attraction to shall we say, the grass is greener on the other side, that allowed us to distract ourselves away from the more pure, more deep connection with the divine. And when we allow ourselves even now to focus on this world, this fleshly world, that's when the more we focus, the more dead we become to the spirit. Now, those of you may remember some months back, we talked about young children and their seamless connection to the other side, talking about who they were, where they died, whom they knew, and so forth. But that as they grew farther away from birth, they tended to lose that connection. So it's not that any of us needs to carry blame for, oh gosh, I am so separate. That comes apart, a piece with being in this coat of skin. And as we move forward in life, as we are wiser in moving forward in life, if I can put it that way, the ideal is to become aware of that which is not earth-based, to allow ourselves to regain, to the extent we are able, a connection to that other existence, which is timeless, placeless, and by our extent here, fleshless. Some people do it better than others. They're the folks that we hire when we need information from the other side. They're the folks we may hire when we need to talk with grandma who's been gone for 10 years, and so forth. I confess occasionally I feel a little sad that I don't have that close, that tight a connection, that the information just comes. A story I've told, I'll tell it again because it's relevant here. Those of you who have ever gone to the Good Journeys Expo in Indianapolis will have met Jeff Poe. He's the one who runs it. And he works as a psychic. And he also works, interestingly, with archaeologists down in Mexico. And many Januaries, they'll fly him down, and he looks at the map and tells them where to dig next to find the next set of ruins. He knows. Well, he told me the story last year on a Saturday morning. He was at the table taking the payments of people coming into the show, and a guy walks in that he knows of because the guy comes in. And Jeff looks at him and says, "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be at a funeral." And the guy says, "Oh shit," and runs out the door. Yeah, I don't have revelations like that. I wish I did, but I'm not there. I am where I am. And that's true for all of us. We can have goals of becoming more sensitive, of being more open to information. But don't beat yourself up that you don't already have it, because it seems to be part of our human condition that the flesh separates us. And the more time we spend in flesh from the time we're born, the farther away we get until we're ready to do a U-turn. There was a spiritual teacher named Alan Ramsey here, been dead maybe 10, 15 years now, who started out as an atheist, didn't believe in a damn thing. And one day found himself dead, and found himself hovering over his flesh while rescuers were trying to revive him. And his revelation was, oh, that's the movie. This is reality. And from that point on, and I don't know the speed because I didn't know him back then, he began to have directer connection with the other side of life, with the divine side of life, if you will, with the spirit side of life. I learned the other day from someone who knew him much longer than I that at one point he was talking about Atlantis, and everyone heard him giving the actual coordinates where Atlantis had been on the earth. So But when we make the choice to be more open, we also have to allow it to happen in its own tide and time. We need to allow it to bring information in ways that we may not be used to getting information. It may be concepts that are completely new, completely foreign to us. A friend of ours, someone who attends on occasion by video, by watching our videos, was born able to see trees, able to see tree spirits, see dead people. As she told me once, somewhere 5, 6, or 7, she got lambasted by her mother for doing this wicked stuff, and she lost the ability. But that's a clear example of where this fleshly body gets in the way of our ability to see. So, goal, I suggest, is that we allow ourselves to combine our living here and looking for the best we can accomplish here, because that's part of the challenge. To allow the good that is ours by nature, ours as part of the God stuff, ours as children of God, to become two. He talks about one becomes two when we're able to integrate our connection to this other side, to this existence that is beyond ours, to this existence which is, if you will, even a parallel universe, where occasionally we get visions, or some people are able to transcend on a regular basis. Okay, then there's verse 11, or saying 11. So Jesus says, the disciple said to Jesus, we know that you will depart from us. Who then will rule over us? Jesus said to them, no matter where you came from, you should go to James the Just, for whose sake heaven and earth have come into being. In metaphysical context, James the Just represents a balanced perspective that applies to spiritual principles in everyday life. And it appears that this interpretation has been largely derived from the biblical James, whose teachings were used to focus on practical application of faith through righteous actions. So while Jesus taught that it is not by faith we are saved, James conveyed the message that it is still expected that we will walk righteously through this world as is appropriate to our faiths. Some key points as I was doing my research. So James is associated with judgment within the human consciousness, making wise decisions upon spiritual understanding. The just part means putting one's faith into action, working toward justice, if you will, not just holding beliefs passively. And Pope Francis, among others, certainly preaches about that part of our responsibility here is to work and walk for righteousness and justice, and speak for those who cannot be heard. And I suggest that part of our spiritual walk is also to pray for those who cannot be heard, that they can discover the power within them to become powerful and become heard. And then 13, Jesus said to his disciples, compare me, tell me whom I am like. Simon Peter said to him, you are like a just messenger. Matthew said to him, you are like an especially wise philosopher. Thomas said to him, teacher, my mouth cannot bear to say at all to say what you, try again. Teacher, my mouth cannot bear at all to say whom you are like. Jesus then said, I am not your teacher, for you have drunk, you have become intoxicated at the bubbling spring that I have measured out. And then he took Thomas and withdrew, and he said 3 words to him. But when Thomas came back to his companions, they asked him, what did Jesus say to you? Thomas said to them, if I tell you one of the words he said to me, you will pick up stones and throw them at me, and fire will come out of the stones and burn you up. Okay, this one left me puzzled. But after some meditating and some prayerful thinking, and frankly, just some what the heck, 3 different pieces. First of all, to understand the Christ Spirit and the whole God is very much like us, being blind men, trying to figure out just by touch what this thing in front of us is. You know the story of the 3 blind men and the elephant. You know, one says, well, it's clearly this is clearly a snake, and I don't remember what the other 2 are. But all of us on this side cannot have full comprehension. And in this story, the blind men are represented by Simon Peter, Matthew, and Thomas. Then, going further into this reading, in our seeking out the divine, it's easy to get carried away by the emotional rush of feeling a divine connection. You may have attended charismatic groups, for instance, where they're shouting and hallelujah and dancing around and so forth. But that's being carried away by you being drunk, as Jesus talks about it, by the spiritual experience. And if we allow ourselves to focus just on that, then we're at risk of forgetting how important it is to find our own understandings, our own communion, if you will, which is different from feeling the drunkenness with the Spirit. It is our seeking of understandings, our openness to understandings, not prancing around in a spiritually drunken state, that is going to help us raise our vibrations. And then the last part, if I tell you, you will cast stones at me, is a reminder. Jesus talks about elsewhere in the Bible, when you pray, go into the closet and pray. When you give anonymously, my words here, but it is our understanding that we seek, not necessarily someone else's, and not necessarily to be shared with someone else. Each of us has our own path to get closer to the divine. Our own path involves our own understandings as we connect, communicate, allow the divine to communicate with us, allow ourselves the understanding to come. That's important to remember. It's easy enough. I remember when I was first beginning to see the other side, I'd speak excitedly about it to people, and yeah, they'd cast stones at me or think I was crazy or make fun of me. That was my experience for myself. And in transactional analysis, they said when something wonderful happens to you, don't start talking about it with others, because that disperses the happiness that you're experiencing. And in fact, if you talk about it to other people, it will be turned against you. Joy in your connection, joy in the understanding you are given. If the divine places somebody before you who asks, that's a different story. Rather than us running down the street yelling at the top of our voices, Jesus just told me something. Jesus just told me something. Just watch for the rocks to come. And that's what he's cautioning about. Then verse 14, or story 14, if you will. And this is really interesting because it flies in the face of what much of organized religion teaches. If you fast, you will bring forth sin for yourselves. If you pray, you will be condemned. And if you give alms, you will do harm to your spirits. Notice the plural, spirits. And if you go into any land and wander from place to place, and they take you in, then eat what they will set before you. Heal the sick among them. For what goes into your mouth will not defile you. Rather, what comes out of your mouth will defile you. So, yes, it seems contradictory, but look at the point he's making. As I mentioned in the earlier discussion, Christ cautioned his followers about praying in public, like the rich men do, he said, as I recall, or doing other kinds of religious-related actions in public. But here's the extension, and this is what I think much of traditional Christianity, at least now, has forgotten. The Christ reminds listeners not to judge others by their differences from you. It is by your words and actions, which reflect your religious choices and beliefs, that you can show them who you really are, and you can honor them for who they really are. You know, how many of us would feel comfortable walking into an Afghan restaurant, for instance, not knowing the language, but being invited to sit and sup with them, not even knowing what the food is? And then to me, that is just a core example of discomfort with the different, which right now in this country we're seeing as disparagement of LGBTQ, disparagement of all immigrants. They're not white enough and white bread enough for us. There's something wrong with them. No, that's not what Jesus was teaching. That's not what Jesus was teaching. He was saying, go be among them and allow yourself to be welcomed and share of them. And then the last one is statement 15. When you see one who was not born of woman fall on your face and worship him, that one is your father, capital F. Now, Sister Pepper of blessed memory would often remind us in the metaphysics of this world that woman was reflective of our carnal, our fleshly selves. So when Paul says, if you're a woman, put a cap on your head, well, the cap on your head, or the male part of you, is the part that is connected with the divine. So taking that metaphysical approach, someone who's not born of woman means someone who is understanding on the spiritual side. It's not a question of what birth canal you came down. It's, are you still attached primarily to this, in which case you're still born of woman, of this flesh, or are you moving the best you can to be connected with this other parallel universe that is the divinity? And if you find yourself too earth connected, well, it's time to move forward. As you find people who are genuinely not born of woman, they're worth listening to. I suggest Father Richard Rohr is one of those. He does not allow earthly considerations to control his meditating attempt to connect and understand the divine and share it with us. As opposed to, say, Pat Robertson or any of the TV evangelists who want you to send more money and tell you that you are special and those people out there who are different are going to hell, thank God. It is a challenge to each of us because many days we will meet people who are born of woman and we have to interact with them. But we need, as we interact with them, to avoid getting ourselves sucked back more firmly into this thing here. G.K. Chesterton, in one of his Father Brown series, is confronting a thief. And it is a thief who has always prided himself on never causing injury to anyone, and he has just beaten somebody up. And Father Brown says to him, it is easy for someone to maintain a level or even walk up the hill spiritually. But it is even easier to take one step down, and the next step down becomes even easier, and the next step down even more easy. And the noted visionary Clayton Christensen said the same thing. In one of his writings, he reflected on when he was a star basketball player at Oxford University, and they were about to enter into a tournament for collegiates in England, and they were in the final two. But the tournament was going to happen on a Sunday, and he had vowed that he would never forgo his religious following for anything earthly. And they couldn't understand. It's only one Sunday. And his comment was, so I break this one, but the next time I'm faced with something, it'll be easier to break the next one. And then it'll be easier to break the next one. And that's true for all of us. Holding truth is holding steady and enabling us to move forward. But it's so easy to step down. And that's not something we want to do. So this ends part 3 of our conversation about the writings of the Gospel of Thomas. Now, I was going to share something else with you from the Desert Fathers, and I left it in the other room. Excuse me a minute. Given the earthly seriousness of this week, I came across this that I'd set aside, not knowing what to do with it. And I do not have the author for it. It's not listed here. But the author wrote that he found a previously uncatalogued manuscript in a European research library of writings of the Desert Fathers and writings of a subset of that he calls the Desert Fathers. Mm-hmm. And it starts with a prayer that to me is appropriate today. The opening of these words. Today, as the world is stunned and grieving again, heed these words of Alred of Revelou, who was 1110 to 1167, abbot of the Cistercian Abbey. What is more useful than prayer? Give it. What is more gracious than pity? Spend it. Hold the whole world in one embrace of love. Consider the good to congratulate them, the wicked to grieve over them. Behold the afflicted and compassionate. Try again. Behold the afflicted, compassionate the oppressed. Call to mind the miseries of the poor, the groans of orphans, the desolation of widows, the sorrows of those who weep, the needs of pilgrims, the vows of virgins, the perils of men on the sea, the temptation of monks, the cares of the clergy, the hardships that soldiers endure. Open your heart to all. Spend your tears on them. Pour forth your prayers for them. And I present that not just as a reading here, but something I think we should be keeping in mind during this time of maximum upheaval. Now, this author, having found this subsection that had never been translated from the Desert Fathers, has presented us with some of their thoughts. He said he did have some trouble with translation because of all the grease stains on the parchments. So here begin the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Go sit with Yuri Clare, and Yuri Clare will teach you everything. Why, Dessert Cart, did I let you get away? I have often been sorry that I passed on carrot cake, never that I indulged. Keep the hour in which you will eat the donut ever before your eyes. Take away temptation, and no one will eat dessert. And then a final one. There are more, but we'll end here. An elder said, "He who does not receive all desserts is equal, but discriminates. Such a one is not perfect."
Stressed is dessert spelled backwards.
Oh, Mary says, stressed is dessert spelled backwards. So, herewith endeth my contribution for the day. Anything anyone wants to share? Lori Kay, please.
That was fascinating, Brian. That was fun. I would add I would say a new age correction to one concept. That the body doesn't hold us back from anything. It is our adherence to the lessons we learn and the focus on thinking that we are only human, as we say, that stops us. And so as we come into the world, we learn out of survival need to keep to go with the rules that have come before us. And it seems important to me to make the distinction because it's so easy for us to find ways in which we can't, and less easy to find ways in which we can.
Thank you. Somebody else with a contribution. Ellie, go ahead.
I've been finding it interesting in my, in my journey of, looking at the different religious books. We have the Christian Bible that a lot of people accept as, as divine's words, period. That's it. That's what we're taught. And yet there are other writings. There's the Zohar, there's the Kabbalah, there's the Apocrypha, there's the Book of Thomas, there's the Book of Mary Magdalene, there's the, that word that you used, I can never pronounce it, Gnostic Gospels. There's, divisions even in the scholars that canonized the Bible that we have today, what books were to go in there and what books weren't to go in there. I find fascinating that the book of Ezekiel was not going to go in there until a Jewish scholar actually sat down with the minds of the time to say, hey, this book actually has messianic writings or writings of the Messiah in it, so it needs to go in there. So out of, all the books that we have, oh, and that's not even touching the Encyclopedia of the Judaica, which takes up shelves and shelves and shelves of space. I mean, it's mind-blowing if we could get all of the books that have been written in one library. Oh, wait a minute, the Catholics already did that and we don't have access, right? But anyway, if we could get all that material and actually compare to, what was written in the beginning before it was all canonized. As you said, the writings of Thomas, it's said by the scholars that, those writings, those were written way before the Synodic Gospels. Well, what else was written before, the canonized scriptures? I've been privileged to actually be able to see an older King James Bible other than the 1611. And that one actually has several books of the Apocrypha in it. I should have bought it when I had it. This was years ago. I didn't realize the value of that then. But but even some of the modern Catholic Bibles have the books of the Apocrypha in them. And it just amazes me, who has the authority to say which books make it and what doesn't. Lori R and I have had several conversations, and she one time told me that because of my knowledge of Judaism, how much knowledge I have and how open I am with the other things where it's led me to the path I am now. And I never really thought about it, because every time I refer to something, I go back to the Torah, or I go back to the renewed covenant, or I go back to the Kabbalah. Well, it's all, my Jewish history. And, a lot of it, I am more accepting, of things in my walk than most are. In Christian thought, you've got Adam and Eve, and then you've got the story of creation, and you go from there. In Jewish thought, you've got Lilith, which was Adam's first wife, but you don't hear too much about her. Anyway, it's just amazing how you were bringing up, the sayings of Thomas and, the Didymus Thomas, the twin of. I have actually heard that, but again, in Jewish settings, not in Christian settings. So, I'm actually very thankful that, your information that you bring, how you bring it, and I don't know the words to use, how you bring it and lace it into modern day religion, world religion, for lack of a better word, paths that, all the different paths that we have that represents in the gathering. So thank you.
Thank you. Liz, did you have something you wanted to say? Okay, I've got you unmuted.
Okay. I just wanted to say that was just very inspiring, enlightening, and soothing in many ways, because I've never been real rigid about, my beliefs or my experiences, and that's one of the reasons I love Revelation Church. But that was especially wonderful tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else with a contribution? Okay. Let us move into our silence and see what the divine has to communicate with us. to enrich what we've just talked about and heard. So go ahead and move into meditation. We'll summon you back in a few minutes. We thank you, Divine One, for blessing each and every one of us, for giving us life and breath and renewed understanding and new understandings every week. Help us to connect ever more closely and interwovenly with you. Help us to be your hands, your eyes, your voice in the lifting up of this world, in the healing of this world, in the providing of solace where people are hurting. Help us to tread lightly, to know when to use our voices and when to use our prayers. Help us to stay prayerful at least most of the time and prayerfully connected with everyone in this family. For we thank you for all the good you've poured on us, you are pouring on us, you're preparing for us. Help us to take the actions that help move your plan for this place forward. And help us to grow ever more connectedly into this person from whom we all came. We say thank you, thank you, thank you for all the good, all the family, all the good connections. And amen.
Amen.
So folks, have a wonderful week. See you next week. Don't take any wooden nickels. Do give out lots of divine love. And we'll see you all later.